Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the matrix. At this point, the chaos is just holding up the lantern in the darkness of this case. Everything has been confusing, from the first break of the news until the current state in court. The trial keeps getting pushed back, and every time it gets pushed back, more so-called unsealed documentation is released. We'll address it, even take time to break it down, yet we advise everyone, specifically the investigators, to stay focused on the foundation. Speaking of that foundation, let's try to make sense of all the confusing information that has existed. Now everyone questioned the housemates and the mystery behind the 8-hour delay, but let's focus on a few more mysteries. The first confusing report was that Ethan and Xana's whereabouts were not known from 9 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. This was reported by law enforcement. So this report would suggest that the two surviving housemates didn't know where they were, and the partygoers at Sigma Chi also didn't know where they were. Okay, what does this mean? How is this possible? The only way this is possible is Moscow PD spoke to those partygoers, and they told them they didn't know where Ethan and Xana were. And we assume that they spoke to the housemates who told them about the party. Now it seems that the partygoers lied to authorities about Ethan and Xana's whereabouts. There is a lie present because once again it was reported that their whereabouts were not known from a specific time of 9 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. So there is a conspiracy rooted at the Sigma Chi party. Then there is a report that Ethan and Xana were at home around 12 a.m. It was claimed that they eating pizza during this time frame. If they were at home at 12 a.m., then they apparently had left the party momentarily, then went back briefly, before coming back home for good at 1:45 a.m. Or if they left the party for good at 12 a.m., then they arrived back home before everyone else. In our investigation, we presented a theory that upon this arrival, they noticed Dylan hadn't gone anywhere and was accompanied by Bonnie and Clyde. A fight broke out between Ethan and Clyde, etc. In addition, Xana had called her father regarding something urgent, and he intended on driving to Moscow, but his other daughter, Jasmine, warned him that he shouldn't, as he had been drinking. Now let's slowly break this segment down, because it's a bit too coincidental. We're right across the street, that being Pullman, Washington. Jasmine was a student at WSU. Go figure, you gotta be fucking kidding me. So her family was 10 minutes away when she was murdered? Okay, let's have a moment of silence because we're trying to keep things calm. Now, this is a major problem to the chaos because despite him being intoxicated, that urgent call by Xana warranted a concern, right? So are we to believe that there was no one else to drive Xana's father to Moscow? That seems to align. First, they observed the drug pushers in the home with Dylan. Xana calls her father about it. He plans on heading to Moscow because he is aware of how dangerous Bonnie and Clyde are, but is discouraged from getting involved. Even still, wouldn't they call Moscow PD for Xana? If my daughter is calling me about some type of danger and I'm not capable of reaching her, I'm calling her local authorities. Something's off with this picture here. Keep in mind, Xana's phone records are extremely vital here and may give more insight to the setting at the home prior to her death. And of course, her phone records are sealed from the public. If Xana called her father prior to the murders, and it clearly was urgent as he was planning on driving to the home, then this was linked to the murders. If Ethan was being allegedly assaulted by his fellow frat brothers, would Xana call her father about it? Perhaps, but wouldn't she also call his family as well? Of course, this is all sealed. But we also have to acknowledge that Ethan's siblings were also at the party. And you see, this is what triggers the chaos because there is absolutely no way that his siblings were unaware of not only that alleged physical altercation, but ultimately his death. There is a blank spot of where Ethan's siblings were after the party. And to be honest, it doesn't matter where they were because they would have been notified about everything. Remember, Ethan's brother was also a part of the fraternity. We've treaded carefully with our analysis regarding the families in our investigation due to respect. But, truth is all that matters, not emotions. So you have an initial report that Ethan and Xana's whereabouts were not known from 9 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. You have a claim that they were at home around 12 a.m. eating pizza. And I'm gonna say it, you have suspicion from Xana's family who were aware of some form of danger or concern, deciding not to drive 10 minutes to Moscow. Jasmine claimed Jeffrey shouldn't have driven because he was drunk. Well, why didn't Jasmine drive him there then? It's approximately 10 minutes between the two states. Jasmine could have driven her father to the home. You have those phone records from Zana, kept sealed, which would reveal evidence of that danger. You have Ethan's siblings who were also at the party and were aware of everything that happened. Now, if you're paying attention here, we have to accept that this crime was covered up by people close to the victims. I'm sorry to say it, but it's understandable. Dangerous individuals who could threaten the lives of others discourages one to stay silent about what they know and about what they've witnessed, even if those individuals are family members of victims. This is just the reality. How about we simulate that phone call from Zana to her father, since it will never be released due to what it will reveal?
Hey honey, how's everything?
Dad, I think we're in danger.
Wait, what? What are you talking about?
Ethan is in a fight. There are people in the house.
Who is it? Where are you in the house?
I'm scared. I don't know what to do. It's a lot of people here. And can you get here, please?
Calm down, Zana.
You're
Are you
drunk.
safe?
You're not driving
Go to your
anywhere,
room and
Jeffrey.
lock the door. I'll be there as soon as possible. Listen to me. If you have to leave Ethan behind,
You're not driving to
then you
Moscow.
escape as
What the
soon as you
hell?
can. I know you're scared, but don't put your life in danger. We'll try to get there. Just hold on.
Okay, but oh no, please, Dad, please.
Now, if Zana called her father that night and he was coming to Moscow, this clearly was an emergency. But if there was an emergency, then why wouldn't they at least call Moscow PD for Zana? Now, Jasmine apparently convinced him not to go because he was allegedly intoxicated. The father has been notified by one of his daughters that she's in danger, and he was just gonna let the other daughter convince him not to go check on her. Even in a scenario where he was drunk, he would tell Jasmine, okay, then you do the driving, but I think we need to go see what's going on. You see, it doesn't add up here. It's going to cause a bit of controversy, but it's not a theory that hasn't been cycled throughout this case. The reason Jasmine and Jeffrey didn't go to Moscow when Zana made that pleading call is because they knew about the criminal activity those housemates were peddling in. You have to remember, Zana's father and sister were right around the corner in Pullman, Washington. That is about 10 to 15 minutes in travel time to Moscow, Idaho. Jeffrey wanted to go to the home, but Jasmine convinced him not to go. In this context, we can suggest that Jeffrey was a bit anxious, was worrying, and felt he needed to physically be in Moscow to protect Zana, right? A father wanting to protect his daughter, as it should be. But if Jasmine convinced him to stay and the reason was due to him being intoxicated, well, this kind of changes that context a bit. Because if Zana was calling due to an emergency and you're 15 minutes away in Pullman, it wouldn't matter what's going on, you're going to Moscow. Perhaps Jeffrey didn't know what was going on, but Jasmine did. She attended WSU. More than likely, she would know if Zana was involved in any sort of criminal activity, even if it wasn't something Zana told her personally. Jasmine would know because of the college circle. And remember, Jeffrey wasn't living in Pullman, he was in town for parents' night. Jasmine, on the other hand, was attending WSU. She was there, yet there wasn't much focus on the fact that Zana's sister was right around the corner early in the investigation. One of the reasons for this is because Kaylee's family literally absorbed all of the attention. It's like they were executing, that's right, damage control. He came to the home to repair Xana's lock on her door. Now it could be seen as just handyman work, just helping his daughter out on their journey to independence and all. But it was something ominous about that photo of her bedroom, like foreshadowing the danger she would face. He was concerned about her security in that home. It wasn't just about, quote, privacy among her peers. Mind you, that was slated the party house, so all types of knuckleheads were in and out of there. And Ethan can't be there all the time, so Jeffrey at least made sure the lock on her door was secure. If everyone recalled, there was a claim very early in this case that Ethan had flushed drugs down the toilet worth hundreds of thousands. We forget the specific amount. But if this actually happened, you have Xana's biological mother, who was a former drug addict with all due respect, yet who was an informant. You have Madison's father and stepmother, who have criminal records and former drug users. And you have a household of college students who had gotten themselves in a world of trouble. Bethany allegedly sold drugs and was paid for it via Venmo payments. You have the claim by Dot, where Dylan, Bonnie, and Clyde, a pale-skinned male with colorful hair, who we assume is Jack D, and another male in a hoodie unidentified, all standing on the porch the following morning smoking marijuana. Some would suggest this was made up, but who so-called delivered the DoorDash to Xana? That's right, Bonnie. So we can assume if Bonnie was there, Clyde was there. Jack S. warned the girls prior, and Jack D. obviously was the one who took Murphy out of the home. They were all there that morning, and we can assume were the ones running around in the home the prior night. Think about it. Why was there a fake DoorDash delivery to Xana specifically out of all those housemates? Because she called her father about the danger, which was drug-related. And although this will be controversial, we have to express our thoughts about it. Those parents knew. They knew the danger their children were in because they knew the lifestyles that they were associated with. This is why there was confusion about Ethan and Xana's whereabouts as well. Reported their whereabouts were not known, then it was at the party from 10 to 1:45 a.m. Then there was a claim that they were at home around 12 a.m. There's a lot of misdirection for a reason. Well, the first reason, of course, is damage control. Also, their whereabouts were linked to the Linda Lane audio. And we all know that the evidence of danger and violence was carried out prior to 4 a.m. It was quiet then, quiet enough for one young lady to slither into the neighborhood, pretending to deliver a DoorDash order to someone she knew was murdered. Quote, 2 a.m. is a dark hour, unquote. Ethan's mom wasn't describing the late night hours of a college town. She was describing a time where darkness covered the night sky, if you understand. They knew what had occurred at that hour, which based on the Linda Lane audio, Ethan was being beaten. Okay, let's clarify something. The female that screamed OMG screamed it in observing something tragic. Ethan's name was heard, and we examined the audio, which we determined someone had been slammed against a car door based on the sound effect. This was in the 2 a.m. hour. Ethan's siblings had to be somewhere around. If they weren't present during this altercation, then they surely were informed. In fact, well, we can say they were the first family members to actually know Ethan was murdered. Wait a minute. Isn't it disturbing that two of the victims, Ethan and Xana, had family members either in town or 15 minutes away from the town? Ethan's siblings were physically in town at the party, and Xana's father and sister were 15 minutes away in Pullman, and even were planning on driving to the home. That's too close for comfort. In this dynamic, they're no different than housemates inside the home, who stood idle the entire time. There has been a constant theory that was presented early on, which the family and friends have immediately attempted to debunk, and that is the murders were drug-related. Key individuals have surrounded this case who are involved with drugs. Parents of some of the victims were involved with drugs. Heck, even students stated that Bonnie and Clyde were the drug pushers in Moscow. If you take drugs out of the equation, and there hasn't been any motive provided, as no evidence of a motive from the man charged with the murders has been provided, then you have to look at what connecting dots justify the theory of it being drug-related.
A stalker leaves behind a trail, and it doesn't matter if that stalker was a student who studies criminology. Human nature surpasses intelligence. In other words, no matter how calculated that stalker would be, human nature would leave behind a trail of emotions: desperation, desire, obsession, and anger. The claims that Kohberger stalked those girls on social media has not been provided. There was a report by News Nation that, quote, digital evidence proved he was following the girls on social media. But this was from guess who, a law enforcement source. And if you figured out who this is, then you would know it's all made up to push the stalker narrative. That would be Mark Furman, yup. There was a screenshot with Kohberger's photo, presented as if it's his Instagram profile, in which he followed Madison and Kaylee. The problem, though, it was fake. It wasn't his profile, and his name was spelled incorrectly. This was the so-called digital evidence. The claims that he visited the home 12 times prior? Well, where's the surveillance footage in any of these unsealed documents, then? There isn't a motive. So without the motive, how does Kohberger find the motivation to commit the crime? Also, you have to put things into perspective. Does everyone recall the report that Kohberger had broken into his friend's home months prior to these murders? He was identified as the home invader. The friend didn't call the authorities, though, yet someone identified him as the invader. If he was identified as the home invader, then apparently the authorities got involved, right? So how in the hell wasn't he charged with home invasion? Impossible, he would have been charged, and coincidentally would have been still serving a sentence when the Idaho murders took place. In essence, that would have been the biggest form of exculpatory evidence known to mankind, right? The point here is that there isn't a motive for the suspect in custody, so it will be quite difficult to convince a jury that a man without any connection to those housemates, either association or a motive of a stalker, that he would drive to Moscow and target that specific home. So anyone who looks at this case from an objective point of view would start looking elsewhere for a motive, and it's centered in the town of Moscow.
Not hard to come to this conclusion. All you need to do is go to 4 a.m. in the report. Zana's DoorDash delivery. Audio of a woman who visited the crack speaks to the employees who describe none other than Bonnie, who had actually ordered the food. Not only is that your drug connection, but that's one of your conspirators who was at the home that night. And they were on Zana's phone. Heck, we can assume they erased prior calls and text messages as well. Come to think about it, maybe this is what happened to Kaylee and Madison's phones also. Nevertheless, with Zana's family being right down the street, we know they were contacted before sunrise, especially Jasmine, who was the sorority sister that was notified. Even if this wasn't Jasmine initially, the fact that word spread to WSU, we know she was informed about her sister's death. And well, where does this leave those families? I'll leave it here.
Now let's make sure this is broken down properly. The father claimed he spoke to Xana that night around 12 a.m., right? And he mentioned Xana stated her and Ethan were hanging out eating pizza. Now in this setting, what would warrant him to drive to Moscow?
Dad, she's all right. Probably playing a prank on you.
Jasmine, let's go right now. Get your keys. Let's go. I don't want to hear it, she hung up. That's not like Xana.
You see, he only mentioned a portion of the communication they had, not the part about him driving to Moscow. And to be honest, if your daughter is in danger, you're going to sober up pretty fast, especially if you are aware, I repeat, aware of the dangers she was facing. Going back a bit here to the infamous WSU Kim. Yep, the roller coaster. She mentioned how a housemate called a sister. Then that sister called someone else. Then that someone called another sister from WSU, who would be her daughter. All of these sisters, and we have to assume that Xana's sister from WSU was notified about her sister's death. Like mentioned, this investigation is getting further away from Brian Koberger and closer to not only the peers of the victims, but also the families. It was reported that Xana was the last to be murdered. Who is confirming this? Well, someone who was physically there. But the father spoke about the front door code. Kernodle also questioned how the killer got inside the house, since the front door locks with a number code. He states every time you go, you have to go around the house because of the number code. So they either knew that, or went around and maybe found the slider door open. He added that midnight was the last time he heard from her, and she was fine. Unquote. No forced entry, remember. But no forced entry could also mean the killers knew the code to the front door as well, you see. Yet he stated that midnight was the last time he heard from Xana, and she was fine. But if this were the case, why was he planning on heading to Moscow? You know, in this case, Kaylee's family has been the center of attention. But Xana's family was 10 to 15 minutes away and had been in contact with her that night. And not just for small talk. That 12 a.m. call wasn't the last time they spoke. We can suggest about an hour later, or around the time it's reported that Ethan and Xana... Wait, let's take a few steps back. This is exhausting. First, there was a claim that both Bethany and Dylan arrived back at 1 a.m. before the other housemates. Then it was reported that Dylan was the only one who arrived back at that time, and Bethany was at the Sigma Chi party from 10 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. Then you have Ethan and Xana's whereabouts mysteriously not known by law enforcement from 9 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. Then it was reported that Bethany saw them at the party from 10 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. Then you have Xana's father claiming to speak to her around 12 a.m., where they were at home eating pizza. Where's Waldo here? There's too much misdirection in the timeline, and I think it was due to law enforcement trying so hard to protect everyone in that town. Xana's family was right around the corner. I mean, that's really alarming. It was not initially reported that Xana had communicated with her father, which places the couple at home around 12 a.m. They arrived back home before Dylan, yet her whereabouts were not confirmed prior to the murders. Let's see here. Okay, Dylan's accounts from that night never mentioned Ethan and Xana being at home when she came back. She was reported to be the first one back home. That's something to look into a bit. Let's see here. The problem here is if Dylan's whereabouts were not provided prior to the murders, then how do we know she returned home around 1 a.m.? We don't know where the hell Dylan was prior to the murders, during, and after for that matter. And that mystery attaches an anchor of suspicion onto her ankles. She can't run away. Now there has to be a link between Dylan's suspicious whereabouts and Ethan and Zana's mysterious whereabouts between 9 p.m. and 1:45 a.m. After all, Moscow PD claimed they didn't know where they were in this time frame. Well, I think there was a call to Xana's father around 1:45 a.m. If they came back home at 12 a.m., then Bethany couldn't have seen them at the party around 1:45 a.m. What if they left, Bethany was still there, got home around 1:45 a.m.? But this is when Ethan and Xana were attacked. Xana called her father about what was going on. They realized the danger and decided to not get involved. I know, it's a bit controversial to suggest that, but it's not irrational. Bethany witnessed something at this point, perhaps left the home. Then Madison called her around 2:53 a.m. because she had left the home and was her sorority sister. Mind you, besides Bethany, there wasn't another Pi Phi sister in the home alive. Dylan wasn't one, that's our conclusion. Bethany decided to not answer, and Madison and Kaylee were soon murdered. This may have been out of fear, or out of conspiring to not be in contact with the victim. Not sure about Bethany, to be honest. Where are we going with this? Trying to pinpoint the most logical scenario with the information provided. The call to Xana's father, which was clearly an emergency that encouraged him to visit the home, is where we build from. It's obvious there was knowledge of a danger. This is why he thought about driving over there, but was told not to by Jasmine, who was a student at WSU, and students at WSU were notified about the murders that night by a sorority sister. Well, the closest to the home has to carry the burden of accountability.
Again, we focus on the urgency of the call. It obviously was urgent because Jeffrey decided to drive to Moscow and head to the home. It's not like it was a casual call, where he just wanted to spend time with his daughter. Negative. This was estimated to be around 1 to 2 a.m. after that 12 a.m. call, where everything was quite fine. So this proves that reason for Jeffrey's decision to drive there was due to an emergency. And Jasmine didn't want him to make that drive because he was intoxicated. Yet it didn't clarify that he was intoxicated. It claims he had been drinking. Nevertheless, Jeffrey wouldn't have cared that he was intoxicated, as the emergency was more important. Something about these sisters in this case, right? They're a bit suspicious if you ask me. Now think about that setting. Xana calls her dad about an emergency. He decides to drive to Moscow, and Jasmine tells him he shouldn't, because he had been drinking. Nothing wrong with showing concern for your father, as you don't want him to potentially get in a car accident. But does his concern come to a halt? Does he just decide to dismiss whatever Xana had called him about? Naturally, he would still be concerned, regardless of being convinced to not make that drive. So what scenario is this then? Is Jasmine also drunk? Does she have her driver's license? Heck, what about the Batmobile? Surely Batman could have driven Jeffrey and Jasmine to the home, right? Ah yes, when you actually needed to provide a ride of significance, he's nowhere to be found. Was there any other communication following that urgent phone call? Did they attempt to call Xana afterwards? These blind spots are what causes concern because we have to assume that reason for not driving to that home, well, it was fabricated. Yep, it was to justify not going to that home at the time of the call. Mind you, they're like 10 to 15 minutes away. How hard would it have been for them to make that trip? Unless Jeffrey was plastered, I don't see him being discouraged from making that drive. Unless he was convinced not to go, because Jasmine knew how dangerous it would be. If we associate the claims from WSU Kim, who stated that one of the housemates had called, well, it would have been Bethany here. Dylan was a, quote, adopted sister, so to speak. She claimed that Bethany called another Pi Phi, who called someone else, believe it was a male, who then let his girlfriend know, who was also a Pi Phi. Then this information reached WSU Kim's daughter in Pullman. Now, what are the chances that Jasmine, who attended WSU, and was the sister of one of the victims, was notified about whatever Bethany had relayed out to those peers? On a percentage scale, we would estimate about an 85% chance. And with that high percentage, think about this, that high percentage has the sister and father of Xana, aware of her death, 10 to 15 minutes away from the crime scene. No matter how much respect we can give the families, this is a glaring coincidence. That's just too suspicious to push to the side. And which makes it even more suspicious is the father was planning on driving to that home. He wouldn't have driven to Moscow for a slice of pizza, my friends. And then you had Ethan's siblings. Yeah, we haven't forgotten about them. They were at the party also. Did Ethan interact with his siblings while at the party? Did he interact with his frat brother and blood brother in Hunter? If there was an altercation in the frat, surely Hunter was there as well, right? I get the feeling that Jeffrey did drive to Moscow with Jasmine. I can't see them not doing so. After an hour or so, I think they went to that home. Instincts took over. They were too close, you know. It would be different if they were in Arizona. That's very far from Idaho. But 10 to 15 minutes away? There's no way they sat across the street while Xana was in danger. But then again, the danger was something they perhaps didn't want to get involved with, you see. Think about all of this, it really changes the perception of the case. First off, you have Dylan's whereabouts not provided prior to the murders. Her affidavit was fabricated, she's been confirmed to be involved, either by choice or by force. Then you have Bethany, who allegedly has exculpatory evidence, but based on the information provided, she may have not only been involved, but could have been a drug dealer. We couldn't determine if it was Bethany or Emily who had opened the door in that body cam footage. But if it was Bethany, she lied to the authorities about being a resident there. Not a good-look young lady. Then we have Ethan's siblings literally at the same party the night he was murdered, so we have to suggest they were also notified about his death, yet we don't even know where they were after the murders. Where did they go? Who did they talk to? What did they see, or what did they hear, which are the biggest questions. Then you have Jeffrey and Jasmine, 15 minutes from Moscow. The father had decided to head to the home, but was convinced not to, due to being intoxicated by Jasmine. And Jasmine, a WSU student, regardless if she was a graduate or not, it is highly likely that she was informed about, let's see here. Maybe this is when Jeffrey decided to go, and Jasmine told him not to. WSU Kim claimed one of the housemates had called a sorority sister during the attacks, or after, not sure about that, but a call was made prior to later that morning. If Xana's sister was informed, as the news spread that same way based on those claims, well, this would be the reason Jeffrey wanted to drive to the home. Jasmine didn't want him to potentially get killed. Logical, but they decided to keep quiet about what happened to Xana, so they're no better than Dylan and Bethany. And it's worse, because this is her family. And you see, now it makes sense why WSU Kim came out executing damage control, you see? Ever wondered why she knew so much about the alleged drug trafficking? Mind you, she claimed that the girls thought there would be a stick-up, remember? In other words, they were being robbed. Stick up for what? Well, it would have to be drugs they're being robbed for. This supports the theory that the home was used as a stash house for Bonnie and Clyde. They were the main pushers in town, of course, and Bonnie stayed right around the corner on Ridge Road. She knew everything about that home, but claimed Koberger did, and was the mastermind. Projection, she knew everything about that home, and who knows, she may have been the mastermind behind framing Koberger. Ah yes, she called the FBI that same day and told Moscow PD about a quote creeper who was at the home. That creeper has to have an identity, and she gave it to the authorities, which means WSU Kim knew those housemates were in danger prior to those murders. Why do you think she immediately called the FBI later Sunday morning? Starting to think the parents are more suspicious than the college students. How's that for a twist? We're only generating all of this from the information provided. And that, well, pretty much makes the case even more devastating. We will do a bit more brainstorming regarding that time frame and try to link everything together. I'll say this in closing though, the biggest exculpatory evidence seems to be coming from Pullman, and it's not from Koberger. This is the chaos sector,